Exodus 1. The Hebrews had large families and so quickly grew more numerous. The Egyptians realized this, and in their thinking and planning they thought that the Hebrews were going to become a dangerous risk to the safety of the Egyptian rulers and the Egyptian people. The king, known by his Egyptian title as Pharaoh, decided to make the Hebrews work harder and longer than they did before. Then, in order to limit the numerical growth of the Israelites, Pharaoh ordered that all newborn male babies were to be quickly killed after they were born. The new rulers in Egypt moved their capital to Memphis on the banks of the Nile River, south of present-day Cairo. Moses grew up there at the royal court. The Pharaoh referred to in the first 2 chapters of Exodus was probably Ramses II. He then was able to re-establish Egypt's control over the land of Canaan and also southern Syria. The Hebrews were forced to do hard work in the construction of the new capital and also in another city named Pithom. They were forced to make mud bricks for the construction of the new capital. The bricks were used for all buildings except for palaces and temples. These more important buildings were constructed of stone that had to be transported downstream by boat from far up the Nile River. The Israelite people were put to work building cities for the Egyptian kings. They also built many houses. These houses were made of sun-baked bricks for the officials who would live in those cities. Those bricks were made of mud mixed with straw. The straw acted as a binding agent to make the bricks stronger. When they began making bricks, straw was cut by slaves. Then other slaves took the straw to where the bricks were made. Then they mixed the clay and the straw together and formed the mixture into bricks, and heated the bricks to make them strong and long-lasting. The prophet Nahum described parts of the brick-making process. This included trampling the mud and straw with their feet until it was well mixed. The mud with the straw in it was then packed into wooden molds. Then, after the bricks were removed from the molds, they were left to dry and harden in the sun. In some places, bricks were hardened in a special oven. The size of the bricks could vary widely from one oven to another. Ramses II ruled Egypt for a very long time, roughly between 1280 and 1230 years before Christ. The book of Exodus records Ramses' death. It was to a later pharaoh that Moses and Aaron went and asked permission for the Hebrews to go out into the desert to sacrifice to their God. This seemed to be a reasonable request. However, since it was coming from an oppressed group of forced laborers, the king was suspicious. The spectacular escape of the Hebrews away from Egypt is recorded only in the Bible. The Egyptians believed that their king was the earth representative of the great sun god Amun-Ra. In fact, the pharaoh himself was considered to be a god. As such, he was always shown victorious in both art and literature over all his enemies. Consequently, Egyptian sources never tell of disasters or defeats of the king. Therefore, we would not expect them to preserve a story like the Exodus. The footstools of the Egyptian kings had images of the defeated enemies of Egypt carved in them. As the pharaoh sat on his throne, he always had his enemies symbolically under his feet. The biblical imagery of "my enemies are a footstool under my feet" originated from real objects and practices in the ancient world. The Israelites were united by Moses. According to the book of Exodus, they crossed together over the Sea of Reeds. This crossing may have taken place at the area which is known today as the Bitter Lakes. Exodus chapter 14 describes the miraculous departure of the Israelites from Egypt. A strong wind divided the sea and even dried up the sea bottom. The people walked out on the dry ground, but then chariots of the Egyptian army were covered by the returning water. Several possible routes could have taken the Hebrews back to the land of Canaan, from where their forefathers had come. The most direct route was the Way of the Sea, but the Egyptians had built a series of fortified positions along this route. This made it too dangerous for a group trying to escape from the Pharaoh. A second route heading eastward across the Sinai Plateau was extremely difficult because there were not many water sources. This is why the fleeing Israelite slaves headed southward.